The words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him, "Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain." Verse 12, "She does him good and not evil all the days of her life." And then verse 28, "Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is passing. But a woman who fears God, the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates." It has been said that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. It is an interesting fact that the book of wisdom, as we're reading today, should close with the praising of a magnificent mother. And today's lesson we have titled Magnificent Mothers. In the household, the father is designed by God to be the strength and guide for the family, while the mother is designed to be the source of unity, virtue, character for the children. The Holy Scriptures have much to teach us about the mother, about her person, about her position, about her role, about her beauty, about her indispensability, and her responsibilities and her rewards. Many icons of the world have written and expressed their praise of mothers and their influence in the framework of society. For example, some presidents, President George Washington said this: "My mother was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. All I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to the moral, intellectual, and physical education I received from her." Andrew Jackson said, "There never was a woman like her. She was gentle as a dove and brave as a lioness. The memory of my mother and her teachings were, after all, the only capital I had to start life with. And on that capital, I have made my way." In fact, Andrew Jackson was known to have quoted his mother often when speaking to his soldiers and others in the political cabinet he was involved with. He says, "Well, as my mother used to say, if you think it's too hot in the kitchen, then get out." And that was his saying. If you can't handle it, then leave. And Abraham Lincoln said, "I remember my mother's prayers, and they have always followed me. They have clung to me all my life. All that I am and all that I shall ever be, I owe to my dear mother." Woodrow Wilson said, "She was one of the most remarkable persons I've ever known. I seem to still feel the touch of her hand and the sweet, steady influence of her wonderful character. I thank God to have had such a mother." W.S. Ross said, "The hand that rocks that cradle rules the world." So now you know where I got that. William Goldsmith said, "The most beautiful sound to the human heart is the name mother." And Thackeray, the lyrist, said, "Mother is the poetry of God on the lips and in the hearts of children." And Kate Douglas Wiggins said, "Many of the precious things ever known come in numbers of 2, 3, dozens, even hundreds. But the most precious of them all comes only in one: mother." So let us look a little at the magnificent mother. I want us to see that even in the scriptures, the women who influenced society most were contributed with the honorable title of mother. In Judges chapter 5, verses 6 and 7, it says, "In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted, and the travelers walked along the byways. Village life ceased. It ceased in Israel until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. So as we look at the magnificent mother, we notice, first of all, that she understands that she is essential to the home. So many women sacrifice their home, their family, their relationships to careers. We find also, by contrast, the imprudent woman destroys her family. In Proverbs chapter 14, verse 1, and chapter 9 and verses 13 to 15, you read these words: "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish pulls it down with her hands." And the King James says, with her fingers. This means she is personally responsible for the downfall of her family. And verse 13 of chapter 9 says, "A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knows nothing. For she sits at the door of her house on a seat by the highway places of the city to call those who pass by, who go straight on their way." That is, this is a woman who sows disorder and antagonism between her children. She teaches her children nothing but to fight and compete with one another. She is impulsive. She is ignorant. She does not learn from life's experiences. She rejects well-intended advice and traffics in gossip, and is self-centered and self-serving. God has warned us about the destructive power of a godless woman. Let me make this very clear as we were studying this morning. Women have power. The woman is a very powerful being. So powerful that God has put her in a position where she must voluntarily give that power up to God and use it for the building of a home and the strengthening of a husband and her children. And God warned us about women who do not use their power for godly purposes. He calls them destructive. He calls them misery. The Bible says, "I applied my heart to know, to search and seek out wisdom and the reason of things." Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 25. "To know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness." Verse 26 says, "And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is a snare and net, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her." Do you see the analogy that he uses of a godless woman? She is nothing but misery, nothing but disaster and destruction. That is her power. It's like any other power that you may discover in the physical world. You may use it for good, but you can also use it for great destruction. And the only way that can be used for good is when it is given to God and to His missions and ministry in life. The magnificent mother is not embarrassing to her family. She is the forger of their home. She shapes and molds her children's character. Proverbs 12, verse 4, the first part says, "An excellent wife is the crown of her husband." The magnificent mother understands and possesses her own emotions. She thinks things through before reacting. She doesn't just take off. She listens. She stops. She thinks and thinks before she decides and reacts. Proverbs 21:9 says, "Better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman." The magnificent mother possesses profound reverence and love for God. From God comes the mother. From the mothers come the individuals who will comprise a society, and that society will determine the culture and the destiny of the nation. How is America doing today? The power of the magnificent mother. She is equipped biologically to carry another human being inside her body and nurse him or her for 9 months of the birth process. That is power. She is designated by God, and she is designed by God to raise children. I want to read you a passage that is very, very anti-American today. It is politically incorrect. Let me read that to you. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 12 through 15. Most Americans would just cringe or gnash their teeth, their political teeth, at this text. Here's what it says. 1 Timothy 2, 12 to 15. And then chapter 5 and verse 14. This is what these passages says. And I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. Oops. What about women working in authoritative positions? This passage is anti-American. It says, but to be in silence, quietude. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. And then chapter 5:14, therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. That sounds so anti-American. This passage, according to many, ought to be stricken from the Bible. But this is what God says about the godly woman. She is the homemaker. You remember that word? You remember the word homemaker? That's what it means. We just read what homemaker means. She's the architect of the home environment. She provides the ambient in which her children will develop and grow physically. The place where they will be strengthened physically, psychologically, socially, and morally. It is a place where a household, a family can unite and bond in relationships. No other place was designed for that. She is an artist. The mother is the molder of her children's character. She is either creating human masterpieces, so the world can marvel at this character of people, or she's carving her children's minds and hearts into distorted failures. It's one of the two. Dr. Ken the Shed said, to simply give birth to children does not constitute a mother. Emerson wrote, men are what their mothers have made of them. Napoleon, of all people, said the destiny of a child is always the result of his mother's work. And Henry Beecher said, the heart of a mother is the school of her children. And Simmons said, if you are seeking to reform the world from all its miseries and evils, you must educate its mothers. But more true to the statement, rephrasing it would be, if you are seeking to reform the world from all its miseries and evils, you must bring its mothers to Jesus Christ. The mother's influence leaves a permanent mark on her children's character and lives. Unfortunately, many mothers have a tendency to attempt to live their lives through their children to the detriment of their own child. How many stories do you have today How many experiences have we seen where parents are trying to live their lives out through their children? They want their children to be what they wanted to be, to the point that they destroy the child's life. It's amazing because it's nothing new. The historian of the kings of Israel inserts a very significant phrase into the account of the lives of the kings when you go and read 1st and 2nd Kings. It's interesting because from what I could see, at least 18 times we find this phrase in the books of the kings. And that phrase is, and his mother's name was, and his mother's name was. We'll give you an example this morning. 2 Chronicles chapter 22 and verses 2 to 4. This is what it says. Then the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah his young son king in his place. For the raiders who came with the Arabians into the camp had killed all of the older sons. Jehoram, king of Judah, reigned. Ahaziah was 42 years old when he became king. But I want us to see this. And he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother advised him to do wickedly. Therefore he did evil in the sight of the Lord like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of his father, to his destruction. She was living her life through him. It is the power of the mother. And the Bible 18 times says, and his mother's name was. The love of the magnificent mother. She possesses the virtue of self-sacrifice. We have, for example, in the Bible, a dispute over the authentic maternity of a child during the time of King Solomon. He is challenged by a situation in 1 Kings chapter 3. He becomes king, establishes himself, and then his first challenge is to determine the maternity between two women of a child. So in this text we discover 4 aspects of self-sacrificing motherhood. Here you see it, 1 Kings 3 verse 16, you find the dilemma. Now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, "Oh my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house." Then it happened the 3rd day after I had given birth that this woman also gave birth. And we together, no one was with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was dead. But when I had examined him in the morning, indeed, he was not my son whom I had born. Then the other woman said, "No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son." And the first woman said, "No, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son." Thus they spoke before the king. Quite a dilemma, isn't it? Then you find the danger. Verse 23. And the king said, the one says, "This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one." The other says, "No, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one." And the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought a sword before the king. The king said, "Divide the living child in 2." and give half to one and half to the other. Then you see the release of the mother and the self-sacrifice. Verse 26. Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with the compassion for her son, and she said, "Oh, my lord, give the living child, and by no means kill him." But the other said, "No, let him be neither mine nor yours. Divide him." And then the blessing. So the king answered and said, "Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is the mother." This is the love of the magnificent mother. She will always be able to deal with the dilemma. She will always be able to detect danger for her family and her children. She'll always release in self-sacrifice, and she will always receive a blessing. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "Youth vanishes, friendship cools, but the love of a mother will never fade." The joy of a magnificent mother. Her family praises her. The husband and her children admire and respect her. Her teachings and influence become a lifelong comfort to them. Their memories will always bring them to her as the point of reference for inner beauty and moral stability in life. Proverbs 6:20 and 31:26 say, "My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake the law of your mother." Because why is it a law? It is a word that binds the heart. It is a word that stays in the heart forever. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. The value that they place on her will always be more than wealth or careers. And she is never forgotten. Her life reaches into the lives and hearts of her children, of her grandchildren, even great-grandchildren, and even further. She leaves a legacy and memories that follow her into eternity. To conclude, what words, what poetry, what song, what eloquence, or what eulogy could we possibly find to express the value of a mother? Her price and beauty is 1,000 times more than anything we could ever express. The magnificent mother understands that hers is a life of ministry. It is a life with a mission for God and good on this earth. God blesses a life that's marked by a godly ministry in a woman. The magnificent mother lives a committed life. Hers is a life of ministry. Hers is a life of humility. Hers is a life of availability. Hers is a life of dependency on God. Hers is a life of productivity. Hers is a life of flexibility. And hers is a life of love and godliness. What would you not give to have such a mother? What will you not do to be such a mother? And what will you not sacrifice to have such a wife? God's grace can transform any woman into the most beautiful creature that walks the earth. She will become the power of God in the lives of children. Her years of selfless giving, sacrifice without complaint, exhausting hours of loving care can only be found in the magnificent godly mother. The memories she will create, the nostalgia her name will bring, the images it will inspire, the hearts and memories of her children in places and sounds that made life the most wonderful experience for them are the treasures she will leave behind for others to discover and memorialize far into future generations. She is like no other. The day will come when that loving face, when those wonderful, gentle eyes, when that gentle voice will no longer fill our lives as she once did. Enjoy her, appreciate her, touch her, hug her, and say, I love you frequently. I promise you she will never complain because she is mother. Questions. Is that you as a mother? What are you doing to help your mother be a magnificent mother? What are you doing to help your wife to be a magnificent mother? Can we say that there is a magnificent mother in our home today? Is your life marked by love, godliness, joy, and humility? Do you give the glory to Christ for what He's doing in your life, for your family, for your motherhood? Is yours a life marked by godly magnificence? Are you willing to do what God expects of you? You may say, Lord, show me and I will go. But God says, go and I will provide. Is your life marked by all these qualities of the magnificent mother? And what a life it will be when it is lived for God.